Vamos dar início a esta sessão, que é uma pré-apresentação do estudo que a AIMMAP está a realizar sobre a Coreia do Sul e o potencial para a indústria metalomecânica. Quem irá realizar esta apresentação é a Penelope Kim. Ela é americana, mas vive na Coreia do Sul, casou com um coreano, é alguém que conhece muito bem a realidade sul-coreana. E não havendo mais nenhuma consideração da minha parte, vou dar início à sessão. Please, Kim, if you mind, start the presentation. Thank you very much.
I just think our system is feeling overloaded right now. Oh, okay. So, next screen, will it go? Okay. All right, to start on a country overview of Korea in general, here are some basic facts to help you understand the country. Its population is quite a bit, about 5 times Portugal's population, but its land area is within a degree of similarity. So you have a very a much larger population in a very similar land area to Portugal. And because it's very mountainous here, 70% is mountainous, the population is very concentrated, especially in the urban areas. About half of the population lives in the region of the capital city, Seoul, which is where I am now. And you see a map to your right with the major provinces and metropolitan cities. It is a multi-party democracy. Our president right now is President Yoon Suk-yeol, and he was elected earlier this year. He'll be serving a 5-year term. The currency is a Korean won. It's about 1-to-1 with the US dollar right now, but it is €1 is approximately 1,400 Korean won as of this week. Okay. So to give you a bit more history, Korea has a very long history. Although organized Korea dates back to about 300 before the Common Era, it was a series of warring kingdoms until about 1392, when the Chosun dynasty took hold, and there were about 500 years of stability. After that 500 years of stability, there followed about 40 years of great turbulence. First, Japan occupied Korea until 1945, and then in kicking out Japan after World War II, the US and Russia divided the country at the 38th parallel to administer separate, roughly halves of the peninsula. You probably well know that after the Korean War, that became the borderline of North and South Korea, and that's how it is today. Beginning in 1953, there were a series of very strong autocratic presidents who gradually gave way to what is now a very open democracy, multi-party democracy. But during those presidencies early on, there was a very centralized, strong economic planning that many people credit with the current economic power Korea has today. Its rapid recovery from total post-war destruction to what it is now is often called the miracle on the Han. So as a philosophical and ethical background, Korea's strongest influence is Confucianism. It is an import from China that stuck very early on. It came over from China, but you can still see the threads of it throughout Korean society today. The idea with Confucianism is to achieve social harmony through maintaining correct relationships, hierarchical relationships, from the monarch to the peasant, and a father to children, from the older to the younger. There is no equality in Confucianism. It's a series of correct hierarchies. So you can still see this today, interestingly, in vendor-client relationships, where the client is king and expects a high degree of service from a vendor. So it still shows up. However, today's Korea, while it's aware and conscious of Confucianism and a hierarchy, is very responding to changing modern cultural norms, and that is changing society. Instead of a culturally absolute place, where there are rules to be followed and rule breaking is not tolerated. It's very pragmatic, especially towards foreign visitors. Korea is very globally aware that there are other ways of doing things, and they have adapted to a lot of those. However, there is still a very distinct Korean way in many things, including business. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So to go a little deeper into the economy, the miracle on the Han was Korea's recovery over a brief time to what the powerhouse that it is today. In 1960, the GDP per capita was only $158 US, and now it's at about $34,000 US dollar today. So it's the only OECD country that went from aid recipient to an aid donor in just 50 years. So there's still Koreans alive today that remember a very different Korea. Next slide. Just on one slide, I'm giving an overview here of Korea's economy. The GDP is currently at 1.8 trillion US dollars, which ranks approximately 10th globally. Among EU countries, you might say Korea's economy is a bit similar to maybe Italy. Trade-wise, China is still its main trading partner, but there are a lot of current political situations and factors on China's side and Korea's side that may bring shifts in that trade landscape. Korea is certainly trying to diversify its trading partners. Korea is one of the world's most export-dependent industrialized nations, and its exports of goods and services are about 1/3 of its GDP. You can see the growth of its imports and exports along with its GDP over the years. Next. So in summary, today's Korean population is a very healthy population and has a high life expectancy, high education rate, very urban, very wired, but also under pressure. For a lot of these statistics, Korea is among the top of the OECD, top education rates, lowest fertility rate, one of the more rapidly aging countries. And as a country, single person households are on the rise. And yet Korea is as diverse as it ever has been, but is still 95% ethnically Korean, so very homogeneous. That makes some unique cultural factors that influence the market. So some of these I've talked about here. In general, Korea puts a great emphasis on speed and service. We call it a 빨리 culture. 빨리 means quickly, quickly. Koreans are very good at doing many things very quickly. And they are also quite sensitive to reputation issues. When I'm talking in terms of international trade, what I could say is that I could give an example of Japan, where first, the problem that happened with Japan and Korea trade was that the tsunami that hit the nuclear reactors caused wastewater to go into the ocean. So Koreans didn't want to buy or eat Japanese seafood anymore. Trade went down, took a hit, understandably. Then Korea and Japan hit some very rough political times. So all of this has added up, and Japan is not a very popular source of goods in Korea right now. So Koreans are very sensitive to not just issues of safety and affecting quality. They're very sensitive politically to a national brand in their purchasing habits. Korea is has a very growing middle class. So that affluence has led to a lot of internationalization, and being an export-led economy, it has signed a lot of FTAs. So Korea is really shifting towards imported products in probably just about all market sectors. So Korea nowadays, at one point, Korea didn't view imported goods in a very nuanced fashion, but now with that increased internationalization, they really look at a country origin as kind of a brand that signals maybe sometimes a premium or a caution required approach to a product. Fortunately for Portugal, the EU has a very positive association, and Portugal specifically is pretty much associated with a high level of craftsmanship. So Portugal benefits from this view of imported goods. Trade barriers are declining with, as you know, the EU FTA, but also Korea signed and put in force a very large trade agreement in the Southeast Asian region with 14 other countries early this year that has really opened up its markets, market access for many of its goods. So, along with these trade barriers declining goes that social trend of more internationalization and curiosity towards international products, a desire for premium products and more choice. So I just wanted to show some of the Korean import, I'm sorry, I can't see the top of that screen, that's hard. Our Korea imports. Korea's total Portugal imports in 2020 were 248 million euros, but worldwide, Korea's total imports from worldwide sources were 447.9 billion euros. So to me, to us, that signals great potential for growth in market share on behalf of Portuguese imports to Korea. I have split out down there to the left some of the specific products, product HS categories that some of you are involved with today. So those are some interesting data points you might want to take into account. And the next slide goes into that in more detail. Korea's imports from Portugal for plastics and rubbers, machines, transportation, metals and instruments here are in the millions of euros. However, Korea's total imports for each of these categories from worldwide sources are in the billions of euros. So the good news here is Korea is not a market saturated with Portuguese products. There is a lot of opportunity and a lot of chance to get in and build brand in Korea for the wonderful craftsmanship and the premium and high quality branding that is associated with the EU and Portugal. So in terms of business in Korea, I wanted to give some general talking points. It does have its Korean distinctiveness. So a little tutorial seemed in order. I summarize doing business in Korea in 3 terms: greeting, meeting, and eating. That's the key to success, knowing your way through these things. First, with greeting, we have bowing, hands, and cards. The Korean bow is different from some other country bows. It's really more of a modified head nod, something we might do in the West even to acknowledge someone or show respect. It's not something where you have to repeatedly bow over and over again. It's just a one time. And Koreans also hand. So maybe a head bow with a handshake. In a meeting setting, you're also going to want to exchange cards because that's part of that Confucian hierarchy situation. Koreans really want to understand how much respect they must give you appropriately. They would like to treat you with the right level of respect. So you will use, and this goes to hands too, you'll use 2 hands to offer your card, and if possible, then 2 hands to receive the other person's card. Take a moment to study it. And a tip I use in meetings is that Koreans will often arrange their business cards on the table to correspond with the person seated across from them in the right order. That helps during a meeting to know to refer to someone by their name. And if you want to do that, Koreans will probably be doing it too. It's not a strange thing at all. Appropriate respect is always polite, whatever you need to do to do that in Korea. So in the meeting itself, you have seating, and Korean business meetings often will happen on 2 long sides of a table. If you're wondering who to speak to, if you're wondering who's in authority, that's going to be the one sitting in the very middle of the long line of people. So the leader of your side, whoever that might be, would want to sit in that spot too. Not at the head of the table, in the middle of a long side. When you speak, titles are often used. So for example, with President Yoon, you wouldn't call him by his first name. President Yoon would be referred to as President Yoon. His first name, Song Yeol, would only be for his mother or a very close childhood acquaintance. If you do business with someone and eventually they invite you to use a certain name for them, feel free to do that, but wait for that invitation. Mr. Kim, Miss Kim is fine, but Manager Kim is also great. Using a title is always appropriate in Korea. Another point about speaking is Koreans don't usually make an agreement on the spot. So it's great to leave time for that to happen later. Give your counterpart time to think about it. Understand that that's what's going to happen. In terms of gifts, once you maybe progress in a business relationship, you can feel free to bring appropriate gifts from Portugal or your own products if that counts. And you might expect to receive some simple gifts related to your counterpart's product or Korea itself, but nothing too expensive, because that does create a burden on their part to reciprocate if you give an expensive gift. Finally, eating. Leave time in your meeting to maybe progress to eating later. That's always a good sign if you get invited, probably that things are going well. So in that case, there are a few things to know. First, with regard to dishes and utensils, often Korean table settings involve one central family style plate full of a side dish or a stew. It is completely appropriate, especially after COVID, to ask for your own bowl, to ask for your own serving utensils or your own plate. That's not strange, not a problem. If you're not comfortable with chopsticks, completely appropriate to ask for a fork. It might already be done for you. Feel free to proudly use chopsticks if you can. You will probably get complimented on it. You do not have to drink in terms of drinking. You do not have to drink alcohol. If you don't, feel free to say so. If you do, there's a little etiquette. One important thing is expect to have your drink poured for you and just pour someone else's drink. Don't pour your own drink. In terms of paying, one key thing is that bills are usually not split between people dining together. The inviting host will usually pay. So if that's you, if you say, let's have a meal, you're probably your Korean guests might expect that you're paying. It's fine to offer to have a future dinner where you pay next time. The other thing is, if you're aware of tipping in some countries, tipping is not something that is done in Korea, so you should know that. Here are just some special mentions about Korean etiquette, whether it's official or not. With gesturing, the safest way to gesture is open hands. Pointing is a little too direct and viewed as impolite. Do not point directly at anyone. Open hands are always safe. The other thing, red ink is when someone's name is written in red ink, it's a bit of a curse traditionally. So just leave your red pens at home when you're doing business deals in Korea. The other thing when you're doing business deals is number 4 is an unlucky number. If it involves terms and figures, just turn it into 5 or 3. Don't use 4. Korea does prefer things being handed with the right hand. That's a gesture of respect. But if you're left-handed, that's not a problem. If your right hand is full and you have to hand someone something with your left hand, it's not a problem. As I said, it's a culturally pragmatic country. Respect can be shown in many ways, not just your right hand. As with most countries, discussing history and politics can get sensitive. Just be wary, follow your host's lead. And that goes to the final point. When in doubt, just be curious and ask gently. Koreans do appreciate curiosity about their culture. Here are just some general tips for business communication. Pay attention to the English level it may seem your business counterpart is following what you're saying, and they may not be doing that. So try to speak slower, try to speak with more simple vocabulary, and try to also rely on written communication after a meeting to make sure everything was clearly understood. You might want to repeat certain key terms a number of times, because a Korean business counterpart saying yes, yes, yes might just mean I hear that you have said something. It doesn't mean I agree. It doesn't even necessarily mean I understand. So that's an important thing to do. In terms of business cards, I talked about how important that is, and rank. Who is the president of the company, who is the manager, pay attention to those things. The other thing that's important is small talk in Korea isn't small. Many business deals are about relationship, building a relationship and growing it. So leave that time for small talk. Understand when that's taking place, that's an important function of your meeting time. Again, I talked about leaving an out for decisions to be made after you leave. While you're speaking, you might say something like, please think about what I'm offering and let me know later. I will follow up later. That's always helpful and polite. Okay, so to go on to more specific topics of interest to you, I'm going to talk about Korea's metal industry as an overview. So as an industry, Korea's metal industry and steel industry was central to Korea's economic recovery after the war. It represents 1.5% of Korea's GDP. It's a pillar of the country's economy. The trade barriers now are mostly gone, but practical considerations have kept foreign direct investment low. As you probably know, it requires high capital investment in this sector to build new facilities. And also Korea's existing facilities are state-of-the-art and set a high competitive standard. So it's a capital intensive sector. I say it's dependent on powerful front industries. What I mean by that is that Korean metal industries supply shipbuilding, automotive, and constructing industries. They're the key clients for this sector, and they're also very influential themselves, especially shipbuilding and automotive. So it's dependent on their economic cycles. And these industries in turn are quite sensitive to global economic trends. So there are some ups and downs and cyclical changes. A key thing to know about Korean products is, along with Germany and Japan, Korea's metal industry products are viewed as some of the highest quality globally. That's very helpful in a market that is crowded with a lot of Chinese metal. That is a key way Korea differentiates itself. Its processing skills, finally, are not focused on consumer products as much as inputs for other industries like automotive and shipbuilding. So the key domestic producers of steel materials you might call Korea's big three are POSCO, Hyundai Steel, and Dongguk Steel. And the basic steel industry supply is aimed at supplying domestic market of industries rather than export, because transportation costs are, of course, high for steel. I would say that Korea's steel industry is facing somewhat of a structural growth slowdown since 2015, and that's because of China's rapid growth in the steel production industry. So Korea is focusing now more on price competitiveness and higher quality, higher end products. Here's a graph with domestic steel production. Overall, it's quite high, but I would talk about the dips. You see slight dips in 2013 and 2020. That reflects that sensitivity to global economy, the global economic cycle I told you about. So in 2013, we had the kind of financial slowdown globally, and in 2020 with COVID. And you see that reflected in the domestic steel production levels. Next slide. Here you see domestic demand. Again, there are lower levels in 2013 and 2020, What's important to note here is that immediate recovery in 2021 after the pandemic, from 48 million tons in 2020 to 56 million tons of demand in 2021. Okay. Here are some statistics on global steel production. Korea is consistently the 6th largest producer and represents 3.7% of global production. This is just a very clear demonstration of China products in the market. In the lower right graph, you see the blue lines are Chinese steel production, and the smaller green one is Korea's. So as with most countries, there's got to be a way to differentiate oneself. And I mentioned Korea is doing that through higher quality, trying to seek higher margin markets in general. So next we'll go to metal and metal processing subsectors. This is a graph with some of the major steel consuming industries. The top 3 domestically are construction, automotive, and then shipbuilding. And this has been steady since about 2011, this hierarchy in terms of consumption of Korea's steel. Now the others category, which is 6% there at the top in dark blue, that includes aerospace and the railway industries. And we'll focus on each of these subsectors a bit more now. So sector growth trends in general. I'm starting with this, but just to say, you'll see this throughout the different subsector slides. And the new technology that's coming up related to eco-friendly focuses like EV batteries, wind turbine structures, and also greener metal processing technology and methods are a key growth trend in the metals sector. Also, more and more companies are trying to integrate processing lines for improved efficiency, so that's a growth opportunity. Additionally, developing high functional materials that are geared toward the automotive industry and aerospace innovations are a growth trend. And then even within the processing, the metals processing industry itself, geared toward more eco-friendly technologies, there's a lot of change happening. So those are growth trends. In the auto parts sector, this chart shows the domestic first-tier suppliers, and Hyundai is of course the largest. But as you can imagine, there are a lot of second and third-tier suppliers. That number falls at over 5,000 itself. Below the table, we wanted to show in billions the size of each market channel and the overall market size. In 2021, that was $82 billion US. That's a huge subsector. Trends in auto supply. As an industry, the auto supply sector is seeing a transition to electric vehicles or EVs. So what we see is the numbers rising for the companies that supply parts that are specific to electric vehicles, like battery related. But the numbers are falling for part suppliers specific to petrol consumption. Whereas, of course, company numbers are not changing for the suppliers of parts that are common to both kinds of cars. So that's a stable opportunity. Next. Moving on to the shipbuilding industry. Korea is well known for its shipbuilding industry. And while this diagram shows 2020, orders more than doubled for 2021. It went from 19.5 billion US dollars to 43 billion US dollars. LNG carriers here are 38% of the orders by ship type, but they're probably an even higher percentage of the order share now. And we'll talk about that next, because this is another demonstration of Korea's differentiating itself with some higher value products. LNG carriers are a growth area in Korea's shipbuilding. They're high margin ships, and they require a precise mix of metals for the storage tanks. Competition is high between China and Korea on these, but Korea got an edge after 2018 when there was an incident with a Chinese-built LNG vessel. The Gladstone was an only 3-year-old vessel, and it stalled due to engine failure on its way from Australia to China, had to be towed into port in Papua New Guinea. So as you can imagine, Korea's market share, Korea got an edge from that incident, and you can see the rising market share in LNG carrier construction ships. Moving on to aerospace. Korea's aerospace industry is growing too. It's made up of a few sectors that we show here. And these are some of the major aerospace industry players listed here as well, according to their sectors. The companies in this sector are active in the area of civil aircraft, but also military aircraft, space launch vehicles and systems, and satellites, as well as providing aftermarket services. Next, we'll go a little more into the aerospace industry market here. It could be hard to tell, but aerospace is trending upwards. If you look at the gray exports bar, that's the most apparent thing to see. It went from 1.5 billion in 2021 to about 2.5 billion already this year in 2022. And I'll talk a little more about aerospace industry growth on the next slide. So this is just a snapshot on the basis of one of the major players, Korea Aerospace Industries, or KAI. KAI has signed a lucrative supply contract with Poland this year for $3 billion, and then has one about to happen with Malaysia, as well as additional deals in the making with several other countries we listed here. So this is going to take the Korea aerospace industry share growth up, and I don't see a stop happening. So to move on from aerospace to satellites, that's another subsector that is on its way up. A key point happened in 2021. The US had some non-proliferation barriers in place so that South Korea was not allowed to develop technology that might lend itself to ballistic missiles launches. But that was released in 2021. And shortly after that, the sector was very energized. And shortly after that, Korea was able to test launch its first satellite in June of this year. So the Korean government has a growth target for satellites, aiming to launch 110 small public satellites by 2031, and that's just the government's targets. So this chart shows the major companies that are involved in the different supply areas of this subsector. It's a quite busy one, and it's going to continue growing as far as we see for the foreseeable future. We were told that plastics and rubber were also some important products to many of you. So to talk about the plastic subsector here, this is just a snapshot of the market. Korea's chemical production technology is quite competitive, but its plastic processing technology is very basic. This creates opportunities for foreign companies to be able to supply automotive and the aviation industries that require plastics, innovative materials. On the consumer side, there's also an opening for higher end and aesthetic products with better design to meet consumer needs. Korea has a really high plastics consumption overall as well worldwide, and the government is experimenting with many different strategies to lower this. This also creates an opportunity for developing bio and eco-friendly plastics for the market too. Going to rubber. Rubber, of course, is a component for the automotive, industrial, aerospace, and electronics industries as well. It also has footwear and household goods sector uses, and this is a snapshot of the market for rubber. So now we're going to turn to the machinery market. Korea's machinery market has maintained a relatively steady level of growth, not astronomically high and probably somewhat dropping. Like steel, it manufactures supplies for powerful front industries like automobiles, aviation, shipbuilding, and also semiconductors and displays, which is a very vibrant part of the economy for Korea. Exports have fallen, you see here, since 2016. And that's just some of the change, because of some of the changes in the client markets for Korea's machinery. First, China, as you know, with COVID has had a prolonged slump in its production levels. Second, the Middle East oil producing countries were quite a client market for Korean machinery, but they've been spending less on facility investment. Finally, the yen has been weak for a long time, and that's created a lot tougher price competition globally for Korea's machinery products. Next to machinery production, this graph just shows each industry's share of the machinery market by value. And an area of opportunity that's growing in this area is kind of hard to see because which is industrial robots. It's hard to see because it's scattered across several of these different sectors. Korea's major demand for robots is actually from the automotive market, as you can imagine, as well as the electrical and electronics markets. Korea's robot market itself has grown at an annual average growth rate of 10% over the past 5 years. So that's an area of opportunity too. Turning to kitchenware. Portugal, as you see, is already one of the top country sources of imports for cutlery in Korea. And so this is a good start to build on in developing a national brand. It's interesting to note that the GDP per capita point where consumers start to care more about appearances and high-end products in the cookware, cutlery, and utensil sectors is about GDP 30,000 per capita. With Korea being currently around 34,000 GDP per capita, right now is exactly that point of opportunity. It's a recent trend of concern for Korean consumers, so it's a growth opportunity. Now, one note, it is hard to split out specific statistics for cutlery from dishes and cookware in Korea. We have some limited statistics that we've seen that seem to show rises in dishes and cutlery sales. But again, it's hard to tell which kind of products that's about, or if that's a long-term trend or more related to specific new market entries from different sources. But there seems to perhaps be some growth in dishes and cutlery sales in the past few years. Next, turning to Korea's cutlery and cookware market, there are some market-specific considerations. First of all, the total market's estimated at 1.4 billion euros. That's quite a good size. You know, in terms of market entry from overseas, the Korean traditional table settings are a bit different from Western ones. You see a picture there in the upper right, which shows probably something a bit typical for a Korean table. Cutlery is usually limited to spoon and chopsticks and no knife. That's because food is generally cut up to pick up with chopsticks before it even comes to the table. The general setting is where individuals will have a rice bowl, maybe a soup bowl, but the soup bowl may be a stew dish like in the center there that everyone eats from together, especially in a family setting. And then there are usually quite a few small dishes arranged on the side with side dishes in them, including the famous kimchi that you probably heard a lot about. But this is a picture of probably what's a not very unusual table setting. So that understanding is really important when entering the Korean cookware, cutlery, and dishes market. We have seen recently some successful foreign brands make an entry into Korea. And I've put the pictures there down below. We've got Tupperware, Le Creuset, and Corelware. Basically, these brands either had products that were existing products that accommodated Korean, needs of Korean cooks and Korean consumers, or they were able to develop products to Korean needs. I'd say, for example, so the left, that's a Tupperware picture. And Tupperware, those are actually specially developed kimchi bins for the Korean market. In the middle, Le Creuset, you see its cookware products lend themselves very well to that Central Korean stew dish way of eating. While Corelware was able to develop a lot of small dishes that were great for Korean side dishes. Now, a recent food sector trend that's a growth area in Korea is a move toward more international cuisine, not just in restaurants, but also in home meal preparation. So for example, the home baking sector barely existed before about 5 years ago, but now that sector has grown to occupy space in most supermarkets. The main opportunities, we'd say, for import cutlery, utensils, and cookware sales would be for either high-end products or within the department store channels, online shopping channels, or restaurant supply channels. So just some general thoughts to conclude with about the Korean market. We wanted to do a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats analysis for you as an overview on the Korean market as a whole. Of course, the EU-Korea FTA means tariffs have been removed on most products. Please do note that in terms of import preparations, this makes it very important to properly document the country of origin. If you have a business partner here, they will make sure you get that right and they will help you with that. But that is a key consideration. You want to have it known that your product originates in the EU to get that benefit. Demand is projected to remain high. And one recent agreement that added to this is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the RCEP, which entered into force across 14 countries earlier this year. It provides access for Korean products, for more than 90% of Korean products, to about 14 new markets, all 10 Southeast Asian nation markets, as well as China, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. So it's expected that Korea's auto and steel sectors will greatly benefit the most from this agreement. So that's going to lend itself to continued high demand as well. With supply chain instability happening due to China's COVID-19 lockdowns, the Russia-Ukraine war, and also the US Federal Reserve's aggressive monetary tightening, Korea and its products may stand to gain ground internationally. Some weaknesses to talk about have to do with the Korean market manufacturers' dependency on inputs from overseas, inputs and raw materials from overseas. It's not a natural resource intensive country, so that does lend itself to some weakness in this market. There's also a traditional structural gap in capabilities between Korea's largest businesses and its small and medium-sized companies. This can mean stiff competition and some challenges in penetrating the market unless you have a friend in one of those larger companies. There is, in general, high competition in the Korean market for the Korean marketplace's attention. Some really big opportunities that I think we've kind of talked about again and again are the growth of eco-friendly process focuses within the different sectors, like carbon reduced production processes, eco-friendly high value added ships, offshore wind turbines, electric vehicle batteries, bio-friendly plastics. These all create new areas of growth. Also, innovative technology developments in areas like electric vehicles, Korea's growing aerospace and satellite sector, and its industrial robotics are changing demand within the industries. Further, the growing middle class affluence and internationalization is driving growth in all of the sectors that touch consumers. So you might think about the automotive sector for electric vehicles, but also plastics, cutlery, kitchenware, all those things that touch consumers. Some threats in general. China's large market presence can't be ignored. It always is a threat. It creates high price sensitivity in many sectors. Additionally, there is a trend that Korea's strong economy means some manufacturing companies steal customers, and non-ferrous sector players are moving production facilities elsewhere to like Southeast Asia or the US. So that's a threat. Additionally, global oversupply in the steel market at present is a factor. In 2020, for example, the production capacity was 600 million tons higher than the demand. So we'll see how that plays out, but that could be a threat. Next, I just wanted to note some important factors to succeeding in the Korean market. This is probably not something you wouldn't think about. Reputation, service, and value are important in most markets, but I'd say reputation sensitivity is especially high in Korea. Right now, again, Portugal has a great image to build on. In your individual company's sense, your reputation in the home country can play into creating opportunities here in Korea too. Koreans do place great importance on brand in the home country. Service expectations are high. It's expected your service will be quick, responsive. Koreans do like extras at no extra cost, even Korean businesses. And of course, as always, finding that perfect balance of price, quality, and reliability plays into setting your value in Korea. As a final thing on the next slide, here are just some general tips. More than many places, relationship matters in Korea. Take the time to get to know the market, visit the market, get to know your partner. Invest time. Putting in a little effort will bring a lot of reward here. Koreans are gracious, hospitable, and very much appreciate curiosity and an attempt to get to know Korea and a few Korean phrases. So this pretty much sums up the presentation I have, and I'm hoping I didn't run too far over with the technical difficulties and want to leave time for questions. Thank you so very much for listening.
Thank you very much. It was excellent. The questions that I had to ask, your presentation was so complete. Now I don't have anything to ask. That's a good sign. And I'm going to talk a little bit in Portuguese in order to know if the companies want to make any questions. Olá, por acaso algum de vocês pretende fazer alguma questão antes de encerrarmos esta sessão? No, it seems everyone is really well informed. So let me just thank you again for your brilliant presentation, for all the team. As maybe the companies that are seeing this don't know, but we are preparing a trade mission in the beginning of next year. We don't know yet the date. We're gonna study it with our partners. Soon we will have also a market study about South Korea that we will provide freely to our members. And as you can see, Korea has a lot of opportunities, especially if you are branded, if you have reputation, if you work with quality. So thank you very much for being with us. And if I don't know if you have something to say before I finish.
Yeah, let me just say one thing, and that is that I want to introduce also my colleagues that you might see on screen. Here to my right, your left is Dave Yoon. And then you probably see on your panel of speakers, Peter Underwood, who he's not in Korea with us right now, but these are two people with tremendous knowledge, memory, and understanding of many aspects of the Korean market. And so a huge part of all we had to say today comes from their brilliant brains and knowledge and help. I'm just delivering a lot of it, but If you have any questions to follow up, please do let Pedro know. We are happy to answer things that will help us in creating that final product of the report that you all will receive. And the three of us look very much forward to meeting any of you who would like to be on that trade mission in the future. So thank you so much for this chance to talk to you today.
Okay.
That's all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.